It's the year of the 1x1 aspect ratio devices. Fight to the death between the Anbernic RG Cube and the new ZPG A1 Unicorn. All of this for supremacy in this niche screen use case segment. This here is the Unicorn. It might look like the Anbernic RG Cube, but it's very different. Let's do a review. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a review of the ZPG A1 Unicorn. But we're also going to be featuring the Anbernic RG Cube quite a bit, because we kind of have to. Now, ZPG is likely not a company that you've heard of. It's a boutique handheld maker. They don't make a lot of devices, but quality over quantity is the scenario with them. And they are going up against the giant in Anbernic, who just came out with the Anbernic RG Cube. And Anbernic really doesn't like competition because the whole reason that the Cube came out early was to get ahead of the launch of the Unicorn. I don't guess they don't like each other. I don't know what's going on there, but Anbernic has a history of doing this. They've done this so many different times with many different devices. They're kind of childish when it comes to competition. And they just go out of their way to try and beat others to the market or do other things. It's a whole thing with them. With the Cube, it kind of ended up hurting them with the whole light bleed scenario. But here we are with the Unicorn, and we're going to talk about that. The selling point of the Unicorn is pretty much the same as the Cube. It's got a 1x1 720p screen, which makes it great for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Pico 8, and other sort of niche use case scenarios where a 1x1 screen comes out ahead. But that's kind of where the similarities between the Unicorn and the Cube ends. The Unicorn has a Helio G99 processor, and there's 6 GB of RAM in here. The Cube has 8 GB of RAM and it's using the Unisoc T820 processor. Now the expectation is that the Cube comes out ahead in performance, and not by a lot, but it does. And I've kind of found that to be the case. But a lot of this doesn't matter unless you're pushing the envelope for performance. So if you're going for GameCube and PS2 and 3DS and things like that, that's where it comes into play. But I don't think those are going to be on the radar for a lot of people on these devices. Minus the 3DS. Then we kind of have to talk about price, and the Cube, directly from Anbernic, is $170 US plus shipping, which is another 12 or so US dollars. Alternatively, it is $155 US from Go Game Geek, shipped with my code Joey, so you save some money that way. Now the Unicorn is being sold internationally through AliExpress, and the price right now is $130 US plus another 12 or so US dollars for shipping, so about 142 US dollars. That puts the price difference between the two on the high end at 40 US dollars and on the low end at 13 US dollars. We'll talk about the price difference and if it makes sense at the end of the video. I will say that at the very least, ZPG includes a case and a TPU shell with the device. Now the TPU shell is kind of an ugly color, I'm not a big fan of it, but the case is good. But either way, these are value additions that cost money, and for a lot of people, they're nice additions. And so for today, we're going to talk a lot about similarities and differences between the two devices. And normally I would just do a review on the single device only, and then maybe do a second video comparing the two. But just because of how similar these devices are, how much is consistent between the two, the release date, the pricing, all of it, I think it just makes sense at this point for me to do a video on the Unicorn and how it compares to the Cube, and then have you make a decision near the end. It's tough to do a review on the Unicorn and pretend the Cube doesn't exist, so knowledge is power, that's how we're going to do today. So with that being said, first up, they both use switch sticks, and I am so very tired of switch sticks. I won't dock points on it, but please, can we move on? The Unicorn doesn't have the same cardinal snapping issue that the Cube does, however, so it's a bit better on that front, although we know that Gamma OS has already fixed that issue. I think Gamma is also coming to the Unicorn, but don't quote me on that. The Unicorn's D-pad is also much better to me. It's much looser than the Cube's, it doesn't take nearly as much effort to push down, and it just feels a lot better in my hands. The Cube really comes up short on this front. The placement of the Unicorn's D-pad also helps, with it being higher than the bottom of the devices, and it's really much better for ergonomics. I find the Unicorn a bit better to hold in a D-pad position, but honestly, both of these devices should have been D-pad top. I think if you only care about D-pad position and D-pad only games, the Unicorn comes out ahead, but it's a lot more complicated than that. For example, we get to the buttons, and oh ZPG, why did you do this? The ZPG buttons are micro switch. They're very clicky with little to no travel. It's just click, just 4 separate mouse clicks. The Cube is more of the normal, natural buttons that you're used to. I will say that I found it very hard to get over the Unicorn's buttons, and it also didn't pass the wife test. I annoyed her when I was sitting 4 feet away, just pushing buttons, and I had to leave the room. The shoulders and triggers are another where the Cube comes out ahead. The Cube has analog triggers, which is kind of a must at this price point nowadays, whereas the Unicorn does not. Typically, I am not one to hate on digital triggers, but when you have 2 devices that are basically the exact same, similar pricing and competing, it becomes an obvious negative. On the topic of overall comfort, it's kind of a tie. I actually prefer the Unicorn's comfort a little bit more, even despite the fact that it has a flat back, and it's just because of the overall positioning of the D-pad, and how much space there is below. But the Cube is great overall thanks to the grips, and I think most people will probably find the Cube to be more comfortable. Once we get to the software part, Anbernic sort of runs away with things here. The built-in key mapper, the built-in front end for those that want it, and a whole bunch more. There's just more and better options on the Anbernic stock firmware than there is on the Unicorn. There's nothing wrong with the Unicorn on that front, it's just kind of bare bones. Now, the screen is an interesting one. I think a lot of people will say that the Cube screen is washed out in comparison to the Unicorn when you see them side by side, but I kind of prefer the look of the Cube. There is either a brightness difference or color difference that makes the Cube screen appeal more to me. That's not to say that the Unicorn screen is bad, but when you have them side by side, it's kind of noticeable. Sound is an area where the Unicorn wins clearly, thanks to the front-firing speakers. Audio is much clearer, compared to the Cube, where it's a lot more muffled and down-firing. And so then we get into performance in games, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, simply for the fact that neither of these devices are pushing the envelope for performance. And if you're somebody who's performance-oriented, you're not going to be buying either of these anyway. These are very niche devices serving a niche purpose. Going straight into GameCube here, and I think even without testing, you would want the Cube for the analog triggers, and if you'll be doing any sort of GameCube or Dreamcast. But on the performance end, they're very similar. They're not very far apart in performance, but I have a much smoother time playing games on the Cube than the Unicorn. And that kind of continues across the board with all of the heavier system emulators. Nintendo 3DS, which is a main reason you'd grab one of these, follows that same path of Cube over Unicorn. PS2, if you're crazy enough to even bother with it on these, is the same sort of idea. There is a lot of PS2 that plays well, but don't buy either of these for PS2. And then we get to Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, Nintendo DS, PS1, and all of that below. And it's all the same on both. The performance difference doesn't come into play. And personally, both of these to me are meant for those systems. And it's not really meant to be pushing GameCube and PS2 and all of that. But it's your money, feel free to try. Let's tie everything together, and I'm sure you remember from my RG Cube review that neither of these devices are really for me. I'm kind of outsider looking in and reviewing these devices that just I'm not going to use. But the Unicorn, at least over the Cube, I find to be a bit more comfortable for the D-pad and the D-pad positioning, and the speakers are better. However, the Cube kind of wins out in every other way. There's the analog triggers, the face buttons, the color options, which we really didn't even talk about, and then all of the software part and everything else. Now, all of that has to do with current pricing, and we talked about pricing before and we're going to bring it back now. If you remember, at the very lowest price difference between the two, it is a $13 price difference right now. However, if we look back in maybe a month or two, I wonder what the price of the Unicorn will be. And the reason being, I remember a TrimUI Smart Pro when that released, and it was about $90 at release. If you go and look at it now, you can get it for about $46 off AliExpress. This is on AliExpress. Not sure how far ZPG is going to let it go down pricing wise, but I think if you come and look back at this in the next 2 or 3 months, might be a scenario where this hits that $100 to $110 price range shipped, in which case that becomes a lot more interesting over the Cube than it is today. For example, when the Powkiddy RGB20SX is $90 shipped from Powkiddy, if you can get this for another $10 or $20 more, that becomes very attractive, and not just for 1:1 aspect ratio screens. Imagine the Retroid Pocket 2S, which in my mind is the best that you can buy for under $100. If this comes within spitting distance of that, within $10 or $20, becomes a lot more interesting because the T820 is better than the T610. So that's the scenario that I'm looking at when I look at pricing difference between the two. I think if you have to ask me today, is the Unicorn better than the Cube? The answer is no, not at the price difference that they're at right now. But I think if you look at this in a few months, it might be a different scenario. And so that's how I'm going to keep this review. I think today, if you had to buy one, it's going to be the Cube. Might change in the future, and that might be interesting. But ZPG did really well here. Let's not kind of change that. This isn't a scenario where it's one bad device, one good device. They're both really good devices. This isn't like it's the Gameforce Ace and it's just a scam of a handheld. This, they did everything that they needed to do. It is a proper release, it works, and all of it is fine. And that should be commended in an age where a lot of devices are coming out broken and have problems. So congratulations to ZPG for doing this, and I'm very interested to see what happens in a few months and where these stand at the end of the day. So that's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk about all of these retro handhelds. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.